The plastic tray hit the floor with a wet slap. Beans and mystery meat splattered across the worn concrete. Every conversation in the chow hall stopped. Cruz stood there, 6'3" of fresh tattoos and unearned confidence, smirking down at Mendez, the quiet kitchen worker who'd been there 7 years. "Pick it up, fish," Cruz said, not knowing he'd just crossed an invisible line that divided the living from the dead in Block D. Behind the serving counter, the yard boss watched silently, his scarred knuckles whitening around a ladle. Mendez's eyes never left his shoes as he bent to clean the mess, but the slight nod exchanged with the man in hairnets said everything. In prison, respect isn't given, it's enforced. And contraband, the cigarettes, the phones, the homemade wine, doesn't move without permission. Cruz had just picked a fight with the only man who controlled what everyone craved. His clock was ticking. 3 days before the incident in the chow hall, Mendez moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. His hands, pale and scarred from years of burns and cuts, worked methodically as he portioned out breakfast. The other kitchen workers gave him space, a small but noticeable sign of respect that the guards pretended not to see. "Eggs are running low," said Lewis, a short, balding inmate who had been working the breakfast shift for almost 2 years. Mendez nodded once. "Check the walk-in." His voice was quiet, nearly lost under the clatter of metal trays and the hissing of industrial steamers. Lewis understood what wasn't being said. In the walk-in refrigerator, behind the large egg crates, sat a small package wrapped in plastic. It contained 3 cell phones, each no bigger than a finger, and 6 lighters. The contraband had arrived yesterday through a delivery driver who had been on Parker's payroll for months. The kitchen was the perfect hub for Parker's operation. Food came in, food went out. Guards checked the deliveries, but never thoroughly. Enough. They were understaffed and overworked, and some had been convinced to look the other way. A few extra dollars went a long way when you had a family to feed and bills piling up. Mendez hadn't always been Parker's right hand. 7 years ago, he had been just another new inmate, frightened and trying to keep his head down, but he had skills that made him valuable. Before prison, he had managed inventory for a restaurant chain. He knew systems, flow, how to track items without leaving paper trails. Parker had noticed. "Need 3 trays set aside today," Mendez told the server on the line, another member of their silent network. "Block C, E, and the infirmary." The server nodded. Those trays would contain more than just the standard breakfast. Small packets would be taped beneath the bread or hidden inside hollowed-out fruit. Nothing too obvious. Nothing that would raise alarms if a random check occurred. Mendez glanced at the clock. 20 minutes until breakfast service began. He moved to the bread station and picked up a knife, beginning to slice the day-old loaves. With each cut, he glanced toward the guard station. Officer Reeves was on duty, his attention focused on the clipboard in his hands. Reeves was safe. He took small payments to ignore certain activities. "New transfer coming in today," Lewis muttered. As he returned from the walk-in, the package now safely redistributed in his various pockets. Full bus. New inmates meant new opportunities and new threats. Some would arrive with connections to outside suppliers. Others would bring rivalries that could disrupt the careful balance Parker had established. Mendez made a mental note to inform Parker during yard time. The kitchen doors swung open as the first guards arrived to oversee breakfast service. Mendez returned to his station, face blank, posture submissive. It was a practiced act. In here, invisibility was power. The less attention he drew, the more freely he could move Parker's goods. As the inmates filed in for breakfast, Mendez observed them through lowered eyes. He noted who sat with whom, who had new bruises, who looked anxious. Every detail was valuable. Information in Parker's network. Then he spotted him, a tall new inmate with fresh tattoos on his neck and arms. The man carried himself with the kind of confidence that got people killed in Oakridge. His pale blue eyes scanned the room, assessing, measuring, challenging. Mendez recognized the type immediately. This one would cause trouble. That one, Lewis whispered, nodding toward the new inmate. Heard he beat 2 men before transfer. Some kind of gang enforcer on the outside. Name? Mendez asked quietly. Cruz, Miguel Cruz. Mendez served the line without expression, but his mind was calculating. New players always tried to establish themselves quickly. They made moves, tested boundaries, looked for weaknesses. And often, they mistook quietness for weakness. As Cruz moved through the line, Their eyes met briefly. Cruz smirked, dismissive. Mendez looked away, already knowing this would not be their last interaction. In prison, first impressions set the stage for everything that followed. And Cruz had just made a very poor first impression. Parker sat alone at a table in the far corner of the yard, his back to the fence. Nobody approached him without invitation. Nobody walked behind his position. These unwritten rules had been established years ago, when he had taken control after a bloody yard fight that sent 3 men to the infirmary and 1 to the morgue. From his vantage point, Parker could observe the entire yard. The basketball court, where younger inmates tried to burn off excess energy. The weight pile dominated by the white supremacist crew. The track where older inmates walked in pairs, discussing business in hushed tones. Nothing happened in Oakridge, without Parker seeing it, or hearing about it within the hour. His pale blue eyes, almost colorless in the bright sunlight, tracked Cruz as the new inmate made his rounds. Introducing himself, testing responses, looking for allies and identifying threats. Standard procedure for new arrivals with ambition. He talked to Ramirez, said Tanner, a wiry man with a sunburned neck who had appeared at Parker's side. Tanner never sat, preferring to stand guard, though he made it look casual to avoid drawing attention from the tower guards. Parker nodded slightly, and Ramirez shut him down, said nobody moves without your say. A thin smile crossed Parker's weathered face. Loyalty was currency in prison, and he had spent years building his reserves, not through fear alone, though fear had its uses, but through a carefully balanced system of rewards and consequences. "He heading this way?" Parker asked, already knowing the answer. Tanner snorted. "Nah." Davidson warned him off, told him nobody approaches without invitation. Parker observed Cruz from across the yard. The new inmate had stationed himself near the basketball court, watching the game with feigned interest while his eyes continuously scanned the yard, smart enough to observe before acting further. That made him potentially more dangerous than the usual muscle-bound idiots who tried to challenge the established order. A slight figure in kitchen whites appeared at the edge of the yard. Mendez. He didn't look toward Parker, didn't approach. Instead, he began a slow circuit of the track. As he passed behind a group of smoking inmates, Parker saw the quick exchange, a small package passing from Mendez's hand to another inmate's pocket. 3 circuits of the track, 3 deliveries. Then Mendez exited the yard, returning to the kitchen for lunch prep. Efficient, invisible to those who weren't looking for it. Perfect. "New shipment tonight?" Tanner asked quietly. Parker nodded. "Double the usual. Price of cigarettes goes up tomorrow. Warden's new policy has cut the official supply." "Sweet." Tanner grinned. "The natives are getting restless already." Supply and demand. The fundamental principle of economics applied perfectly within prison walls. When official channels tightened restrictions, Parker's operation thrived. Cigarettes, liquor, drugs, phones, information, protection. These were the commodities of his kingdom. And like any good king, he ensured his subjects received just enough to keep them compliant, but not enough to make them independent. "Keep an eye on the new fish," Parker said, rising from his seat. "Let me know who he talks to, what he asks about." Tanner nodded. "Think he'll be trouble?" Parker glanced once more at Cruz, who was now doing pull-ups on the bar, showcasing his strength to anyone watching. "A peacock spreading its feathers. Everyone's trouble," Parker replied. "Question is whether they're useful trouble or not." As Parker walked toward the entrance to the cell block, inmates acknowledged him with slight nods or by stepping aside. No obvious deference that would attract the guard's attention, but clear recognition of his status. This was his kingdom, had been for 8 years, would be until his release in 3 more, unless someone was foolish enough to challenge him. But Parker had weathered those storms before, and the prison graveyard had the markers to prove it. The chow hall hummed with the controlled chaos of lunch service. 200 inmates moved through the lines, collected their trays, found their designated seats among unspoken territorial boundaries. Guards stood at strategic positions, hands resting near their batons, watching for the subtle shifts in energy that preceded trouble. Cruz stood in line, tray in hand, surveying the room with calculating eyes. A week at Oakridge had taught him the basics: who sat where, who controlled what, the racial divisions, the gang affiliations, the loners who were either predators or prey. But one thing remained unclear: the power structure. In every prison, someone ran things from the shadows, Someone controlled the flow of contraband, settled disputes, arranged protection. At Oakridge, all signs pointed to Parker, but Cruz had yet to confirm the full extent of his influence. "Move it along," barked a guard, and Cruz shuffled forward in the line. Mendez worked the serving station, methodically scooping beans onto each tray. His movements were precise, his expression blank, his eyes never meeting those of the inmates he served. The perfect, invisible man. When Cruz reached the front of the line, he paused. Mendez placed a scoop of beans on his tray, then moved to add a piece of cornbread. "That all you got?" Cruz asked, his voice deliberately loud enough to carry. "Looks like you've been skimming, keeping the good stuff for yourself." A ripple of tension moved through the inmates nearby. Such a direct challenge was rare, especially in the open where guards could intervene. Mendez said nothing, simply held the cornbread server, waiting for Cruz to move on. "I asked you a question, kitchen bitch," Cruz pressed, stepping slightly closer. "What else you got back there?" From his table in the corner, Parker watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. Several of his crew tensed, ready to move if given the signal, but Parker remained still, observing. Mendez finally looked up, meeting Cruz's eyes briefly. "Just what you see. Move along." Cruz smiled, a predatory flash of teeth. Then, with deliberate slowness, he tilted his tray, spilling its contents onto the floor at Mendez's feet. The plastic tray hit the floor with a wet slap. Beans and mystery meat splattered across the worn concrete. Every conversation in the chow hall stopped. Cruz stood there, 6'3" of fresh tattoos and unearned confidence, smirking down at Mendez. "Pick it up, fish," Cruz said, not knowing he just crossed an invisible line that divided the living from the dead in Block D. Behind the serving counter, Parker watched silently, his scarred knuckles whitening around a ladle. Mendez's eyes never left his shoes as he bent to clean the mess, but the slight nod exchanged with Parker said everything. "Inmate, back in line." A guard approached, hand on baton. "Get a new tray and sit down or you're going to the hole." Cruz shrugged, collected a fresh tray and moved on as if nothing had happened. He found a seat at an empty table still within sight of Mendez and began to eat, seemingly oblivious to the charged atmosphere he had created. Mendez finished cleaning the spill, returned to his position, and continued serving without expression. But those who knew him well could see the slight tightness around his eyes, the barely perceptible tension in his shoulders. As lunch service concluded and inmates began filing out, Parker approached the serving line. He handed his tray to another, kitchen worker, then spoke quietly to Mendez for precisely 5 seconds before walking away. No one could hear the exchange, but its meaning rippled through the network of knowing glances that followed. Cruz had marked himself, and in Oakridge Maximum Security, being marked was usually the beginning of the end. In prison, respect isn't given, it's enforced. And contraband, the cigarettes, the phones, the homemade wine, doesn't move without permission. Cruz had just picked a fight with the only man who controlled what everyone craved. His clock was ticking. Wilson paced the small cell, 6 steps one way, 6 steps back. His thin frame cast a nervous shadow against the cinder block wall as the afternoon sun filtered through the narrow window. Cruz sat on the lower bunk, calmly flipping through a dog-eared magazine. "You have no idea what you just did," Wilson said, running a hand through his thinning blonde hair. At 43, he had spent nearly half his life behind bars, learning the hard way how to survive. "No fucking idea." Cruz looked up, annoyed by the interruption. "Enlighten me then, old man." Wilson stopped pacing, glancing nervously at the cell door. "That guy you disrespected? Mendez. He runs the kitchen. So, he looks like a nobody to me. Some punk who cooks slop." A bitter laugh escaped Wilson's lips. "That nobody controls everything that comes in and out of this place. Food, cigarettes, phones, drugs, and he does it for Parker." Cruz set his magazine down, finally interested. "Parker, the yard boss, right? Big guy, always sitting alone. The fact you don't already know this means you're either stupid or suicidal," Wilson said, resuming his pacing. "Parker runs everything, and Mendez is his right hand when it comes to moving product." Cruz shrugged, unimpressed. "I've seen bigger operations. Ran with the Locos Sangre on the outside. We had cops on payroll, judges looking the other way. This isn't the outside," Wilson hissed. "In here, Parker decides if you eat, if you smoke, if you make a phone call to your family. He decides if you walk the yard in peace or get a shank between your ribs in the shower." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Cruz's face. "So I knocked over a tray. Big deal. Wilson leaned closer, lowering his voice. 3 years ago, an inmate called Mendez a wetback in the chow line. 2 days later, he was found in the laundry room with a broken neck. Accident, they said. Equipment malfunction. Cruz's jaw tightened. I don't scare easy. Then you're a fool. This is Mendez's third stretch. 15 years total behind bars. Looks quiet, right? That's because he doesn't need to be loud. He's got Parker. Cruz stood suddenly, causing Wilson to flinch back. I've fought my own battles since I was 12. My old man used to beat me bloody, then lock me in a closet for days. School, juvie, county, streets. I've survived it all. No kitchen worker. And his boss are going to make me roll over. Wilson shook his head, defeated. Your funeral, man. Just don't expect anyone to help when they come for you. And they will come. The cell door buzzed open for afternoon count. Both men stood facing the entrance as a guard walked past, marking their presence on his clipboard. What would you do? Cruz asked after the guard had moved on. If you were me, Wilson sighed. Go to Parker. Apologize. Offer to work off the disrespect. Maybe you get assigned extra laundry duty for a month. Maybe you have to move some packages. Better than the alternative. Cruz snorted. Not happening. Then watch your back. Especially in the shower, the yard, anywhere the cameras have blind spots. And don't eat the food Mendez serves you personally. Cruz lay back on his bunk, arms folded behind his head. His posture projected confidence, but the slight crease between his eyebrows betrayed the first seeds of doubt. Maybe I'll just go straight to the source, he mused. Have a chat with this Parker. Man to man. Wilson laughed, a genuine sound of disbelief. Nobody approaches Parker without invitation. Try that, and you won't make it within 10 feet of him. The buzzer sounded again, signaling movement time. Wilson headed for the door, then paused. One last thing, he said quietly. Whatever you do, don't go to the guards. Snitches don't last a week in Oakridge. Cruz nodded, standing to follow his cellmate out. As they joined the river of inmates flowing toward the yard, his eyes scanned the crowd, suddenly more aware of the watchful gazes tracking his movements. The game had changed, and Cruz was beginning to realize he might have made the first move without knowing all the rules. Cruz woke to find his toothpaste missing. A small thing, barely worth noticing. But the next day, his soap disappeared. Then his extra pair of socks. The day after, he received only half portions at meals, though the guards never seemed to notice. It's starting, Wilson muttered as they returned to their cell after dinner. The squeeze. Cruz said nothing, but his jaw clenched as he surveyed their small shared space. Nothing else seemed to be missing, but something felt off. He ran his hand along the underside of his mattress and found the source of his unease. A small tear in the fabric recently made. Someone's been in here, he said, flipping the thin mattress over. Nothing hidden, nothing planted. Just the intrusion itself, the message it sent. We can reach you anywhere. Wilson sat on his bunk, pointedly, reading a paperback, distancing himself from Cruz's troubles. Self-preservation was the only reliable strategy in Oakridge. You got commissary coming tomorrow, right? Wilson asked without looking up. Don't expect to receive everything you ordered. Cruz slammed his fist against the wall. They think this will break me? I've gone without before. Lived on the streets, ate from dumpsters. It's not about breaking you, Wilson replied calmly. It's about isolation. First your comfort, then your status, then your safety. They're marking you as untouchable. The next morning proved Wilson right. Cruz's commissary order arrived with half the items missing. No cigarettes, no coffee, no radio batteries. The message was clear to everyone. Cruz was being cut off from the small luxuries that made prison life bearable. In the shower that afternoon, Cruz found himself alone, except for a single inmate finishing up. The man, a heavy-set white guy with Nazi tattoos, glanced at Cruz, then quickly averted his eyes and hurried out. Nobody wanted to be associated with a marked man. Cruz was reaching for the soap dispenser when he noticed something on his shelf. A crude shank, fashioned from a sharpened toothbrush handle, lying where anyone might see it. A plant. If a guard found it, Cruz would go straight to solitary. He grabbed the shank and quickly wrapped it in his washcloth, heart pounding. As he turned to leave, a guard appeared in the doorway. Problem, inmate? The guard's eyes narrowed suspiciously. No, sir, Cruz replied, clutching the washcloth casually against his hip. Just finished. The guard stepped aside, allowing Cruz to pass. A close call, too close to be coincidence. He disposed of the shank in a toilet, flushing twice to ensure. It disappeared, but the message had been received. They could get him sent to solitary any time they wanted. Back in his cell, a new development awaited. His few family photos, kept in a small album under his pillow, had been defaced. Crude drawings, obscene suggestions, faces scratched out. These weren't just possessions. They were his only connection to the outside world. Wilson watched silently as Cruz examined the damaged photos, his hands trembling with barely controlled rage. "They want you to react," Wilson cautioned. "To fight back, break rules, give them an excuse." "Who did this?" Cruz demanded. "Which one of Parker's bitches came in here?" Wilson shook his head. "Could be anyone. That's how his network works. Eyes everywhere, hands everywhere. Parker probably doesn't even know the details, just gave the general order." Cruz carefully placed the photos back under his pillow. "I need to talk to Donovan," he said quietly. Wilson's eyes widened. "The White Power crew? Are you insane? Parker and Donovan have a truce, but barely. You try to play them against each other, and you'll start a war. Maybe a war is what this place needs," Cruz replied, his voice cold. "Shake things up a bit. Wars have casualties," Wilson warned. "And in here, it's usually guys like us who end up bleeding out on the concrete." Cruz smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Let me worry about that. I survived the streets of East LA. I can survive whatever games these punks want to play." As the cell block lights dimmed for night, Cruz lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The psychological warfare had begun, but they had underestimated him if they thought a few missing items and scare tactics would break his resolve. Tomorrow he would make his move, approach Donovan, seek protection or alliance. The question was whether he would live long enough to reach the yard. The weight pile in the northeast corner of the yard belonged to Donovan's crew. 6 white men with shaved heads and prison-inked swastikas, pumping iron and eyeing the yard like predators. They kept to themselves most days, maintaining an uneasy truce with the other factions, not out of respect, but pragmatism. Even racists needed cigarettes and phones. Cruz approached slowly, keeping his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. Heads turned as he crossed the invisible boundary. Conversations stopped. Donovan himself sat on a bench, spotting for another inmate. Late 40s, skin weathered from years in prison yards, arms corded with lean muscle. His pale blue eyes tracked Cruz's approach with clinical detachment. "Bold move, amigo," Donovan said, his voice carrying just far enough to reach Cruz. "This area is invitation only." Cruz stopped a respectful distance away. "Need to talk." "Private." Donovan considered him for a long moment, then nodded to his crew. They moved away, creating a bubble of artificial privacy, while still close enough to intervene if needed. "You got balls, I'll give you that," Donovan said, leaning forward, "especially after pissing off Parker's kitchen boy. Word travels fast." "That why I'm here," Cruz replied. "Looking for some insurance." A thin smile crossed Donovan's face. "Insurance? Against Parker? And what makes you think I'd cross him for a spick I don't know?" Cruz didn't react to the slur. "Heard you and Parker have history. Thought maybe you'd appreciate someone willing to push back." "History," Donovan repeated, amusement in his voice. "That's one way to put it. He took 3 of my boys to the infirmary last year. But we came to an understanding. Business is business. He stays out of my way. I stay out of his. What if that balance shifted?" Cruz pressed. "What if Parker wasn't running things anymore?" Donovan's expression hardened. "Listen carefully, because I'm only saying this once. Parker's been running Oakridge for 8 years. Know why? Because he's smart, connected, patient. I hate the man's guts, but I respect his operation." "Seems to me like you're afraid of him," Cruz taunted softly. In one fluid motion, Donovan stood, his face inches from Cruz's. "I've buried better men than you for less insulting words," he hissed. "The only reason you're still breathing is because I'm curious where this suicide mission ends." Across the yard, Parker watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Tanner muttered something, but Parker raised a hand, silencing him. "I can be useful," Cruz continued, undeterred. "I know how to move product, manage crews. I had 60 soldiers on the outside, and now you have none," Donovan replied. "Just a target on your back. Parker sees us talking right now. By dinner, he'll know exactly what was said." Cruz glanced across the yard, meeting Parker's distant gaze. "Let him know. I'm not hiding," Donovan chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "You really don't get it. This isn't the streets. There's nowhere to run, no territory to claim. It's a closed system, and Parker controls the flow. Every system has weaknesses." Cruz insisted. "Every king can fall." "Not without casualties," Donovan said, returning to his bench. "And I'm not interested in being collateral damage in your little rebellion. Now get the fuck away from my weights before my tolerance expires. Cruz stood his ground for 3 more seconds, just long enough to save face, then turned and walked away. The rejection stung, but he had expected it. This had been about sending a message to Parker as much as seeking alliance with Donovan. He crossed the yard. Cruz noticed how inmates moved aside, avoiding proximity. News of his approach to Donovan had spread instantly through the silent network of nods and glances that constituted prison communication. He was now officially a problem, a destabilizing element in the carefully balanced ecosystem. At the fence line, Officer Bennett watched Cruz with newfound interest. The correctional officer had been at Oakridge for 12 years, long enough to recognize the signs of brewing conflict, long enough to know how to exploit it. Cruz returned to his usual spot near the basketball court, now conspicuously alone. The isolation was physical, but more importantly, social. No one to watch his back, no one to relay messages, no one to trade with. In prison, such isolation was often the prelude to violence. From his corner table, Parker finally made his move. A slight nod to Tanner, who slipped away toward the cell blocks. The next phase was beginning, and Cruz had just accelerated his own downfall by approaching Donovan. The yard buzzer sounded, signaling the end of recreation time. As inmates filed toward the entrance, Cruz found himself hemmed in, forced to the back of the line, vulnerable, exposed. But he survived the walk, reached his cell without incident. The lack of immediate retaliation was somehow worse than an attack. Would have been. It meant they were planning something more elaborate, something worth waiting for. 7 years ago, Rafael Mendez arrived at Oakridge with a 10-year sentence for armed robbery. 5'9", 160 pounds, he was unremarkable in every way that mattered in prison. Not particularly strong, not connected to any gang, not skilled in violence. The kind of inmate typically designated as prey. His first week, he was beaten for his shoes. His second week, he was forced to surrender his commissary. By the third week, larger inmates were eyeing him for worse purposes. Mendez understood the trajectory. He had seen it before during previous shorter stints in county. Without intervention, his decade at Oakridge would be brutal and possibly fatal. Then came kitchen assignment, a stroke of bureaucratic randomness that changed everything. Mendez had worked as a restaurant manager before his conviction. He understood inventory, schedules, the flow of supplies. Within a month, he had reorganized the prison kitchen storage system, reducing waste and improving efficiency. The guards noticed. More importantly, Parker noticed. "You have skills," Parker had told him during a carefully arranged meeting in the laundry room. "Skills that are wasted on making better slop for ungrateful inmates." That day, Mendez made his choice. Survival over principles. Practical alliance over solitary vulnerability. Now, alone in his cell after his shift, Mendez studied the small photograph he kept hidden behind a loose brick near his bunk. A woman with dark hair holding a boy of about 7, his wife, Carmen, his son, Miguel. The reason he needed to survive Oakridge, the reason he worked with Parker. Every dollar he earned moving contraband went to them, smuggled out through a guard with a gambling problem and a flexible moral code. It wasn't much, but it helped Carmen make rent, keep Miguel in decent clothes, pay for after-school programs that kept him off the streets where Mendez had gone wrong. A soft tap on his cell door interrupted his thoughts. Mendez quickly returned the photo to its hiding place. "Count cleared," said the voice of his cellmate, Jackson, an older black man serving 25 to life who minded his own business and expected the same courtesy. They rarely spoke beyond necessary communication, an arrangement that suited them both. Jackson entered and climbed to his top bunk without a glance at Mendez. Another unspoken agreement. Neither acknowledged the other's private moments. "Message. From the yard," Jackson said after several minutes of silence. "Parker wants to see you. Laundry room, 10 minutes. Mendez nodded, though Jackson wasn't looking. In the complex hierarchy of prison, Jackson wasn't part of Parker's crew, but like everyone, he understood the value of relaying important information. Small favors built credit that might be needed later. The laundry room after evening count was officially closed, but certain guards could be counted on to look the other way, especially those on Parker's payroll. Mendez made his way there through the semi-darkened corridors, nodding to the guard on duty, who conveniently found paperwork to occupy his attention. Parker waited between rows of industrial washing machines, the hum of a single operating unit, providing cover for their conversation. No one else was present, a sign that the matter was serious and private. Cruz approached Donovan today, Parker said without preamble, looking for protection or alliance. Mendez absorbed this information, silently. It wasn't surprising, but it was concerning. Cruz was proving more resourceful than the typical troublemaker. Donovan turned him down. Parker continued, but the attempt itself concerns me. Most would have apologized by now, tried to make amends. He has pride, Mendez observed quietly, and doesn't understand the system yet. Parker studied Mendez with calculating eyes. The kitchen incident. It was public, witnessed. Makes it harder to resolve quietly. Mendez understood what wasn't being said. The disrespect had not just been to him, but to Parker's authority. If left unchallenged, others might test boundaries. What do you need from me? Mendez asked. Pressure hasn't worked. Time to try opportunity. Parker replied. We'll offer him a chance to work off the disrespect. Kitchen duty, with you supervising. Mendez raised an eyebrow, the only indication of his surprise. You want me to work with him? I want you to assess him, Parker clarified. If he's adaptable, he could be useful. If not, being close gives you the opportunity to deal with him more permanently. The implication was clear. Parker was offering Mendez the chance to handle Cruz personally, one way or another. I'll speak to the kitchen supervisor tomorrow, Mendez said with a nod. Get him on the breakfast shift. Good. Parker turned to leave, then paused. How's your family? It wasn't a casual question. It was a reminder of why Mendez cooperated, of what he had to lose. They're well, Mendez replied carefully. My son starts 3rd grade next month. Parker nodded. Make sure he stays in school. Education is important. The conversation was over. Mendez waited the customary 5 minutes after Parker's departure before leaving himself. As he walked back to his cell, he considered the task ahead. Cruz would view kitchen assignment as either punishment or opportunity. How he responded would determine his fate. For all his quiet demeanor, Mendez had helped remove problems before. Prison had its own justice system, its own method of maintaining order. If Cruz couldn't adapt, couldn't show respect, Mendez would do what was necessary to protect the system that protected his family. It wasn't personal, it was survival. The shower room at Oakridge was a study in institutional neglect. Cracked tiles, perpetual mildew, drains that backed up during heavy use. 4 shower heads on each wall. No partitions, no privacy. A place of vulnerability where inmates were at their most exposed, literally and figuratively. Cruz stood under the lukewarm spray, one eye always open despite the soap running down his face. 3 days had passed since his failed approach to Donovan. 3 days of increasing isolation and petty harassments, the screws tightening slowly. He had expected direct confrontation by now, a beating in a blind spot, a threat delivered with physical emphasis. The waiting was almost worse than the violence would be. Psychological warfare designed to keep him on edge. The shower room was empty except for Cruz, unusual for mid-afternoon. Most inmates preferred the relative safety of numbers, but Cruz had deliberately chosen this time, suspecting a trap, but preferring to meet it on his terms rather than theirs. The door opened. 2 men entered, both wearing shower shoes and carrying toiletry kits, both members of Parker's inner circle. Tanner, the wiry lookout always at Parker's side in the yard, and Reese, a heavily muscled former boxer serving 12 years for aggravated assault. Cruz kept his back to them, but watched their reflections in the metal paper towel dispenser on the wall. They took positions at shower heads on either side of him, boxing him in. No pretense of coincidence. Water pressure is shit today, Tanner commented casually, turning on his shower. Always is on this tier, Reese replied, his massive shoulders tensing as he adjusted his water temperature. Cruz said nothing, maintaining the fiction that this was just 3 inmates showering. All of them knew better. Heard you been asking questions about Parker, Tanner said, now directly addressing Cruz. Talking to people you shouldn't be talking to. Cruz turned slightly, keeping both men in his field of vision. Free country. Even in here, Reese laughed, a harsh barking sound. Nothing's free in prison, fish. Everything costs. Some things cost more than others. They were moving now, subtly adjusting positions to flank him completely. Cruz let his soap drop, bending slowly to retrieve it, using the movement to position his feet for better balance. Parker sent a message, Tanner said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Stay in your lane. Do your time. Forget whatever ideas you got about changing things. And if I don't feel like taking orders, Cruz replied, standing to his full height. deliberately showcasing his own muscled physique, then were authorized to provide some physical education. Reese grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. Nothing permanent, just enough to clarify the hierarchy. Cruz nodded as if considering their words. Then, without warning, he launched himself at Tanner, the weaker of the two threats. His shoulder connected with Tanner's chest, driving him back against the tiled wall with enough force to crack several tiles. Before Tanner could recover, Cruz landed 2 sharp jabs to his ribs, targeting the kidneys. Tanner gasped and crumpled, but Cruz was already spinning to face Reese, who had moved with surprising speed for his size. Reese's fist connected with Cruz's jaw, sending a shock of pain through his skull and momentarily darkening his vision. Cruz backpedaled, slipping on the wet floor but maintaining his balance. Reese pressed forward, confident in his superior size and boxing experience. He threw another heavy punch aimed at Cruz's temple, but Cruz ducked under it and drove his fist into Reese's unprotected solar plexus. Reese grunted but didn't go down. Instead, he wrapped his massive arms around Cruz, attempting to use his weight advantage in close quarters. Cruz responded by driving his forehead into Reese's nose, feeling cartilage crunch on impact. Blood sprayed across both their faces. Reese howled and loosened his grip just enough for Cruz to break free. Behind him, Tanner was struggling to his feet, retrieving something from his shower kit. A weapon. The glint of metal confirmed Cruz's suspicion. A shank fashioned from a filed-down spoon handle. Cruz kicked hard at Reese's knee, feeling something tear beneath his foot. As Reese went down, Cruz grabbed the shampoo bottle from his own kit and squeezed its contents onto the floor, between himself and Tanner. When Tanner rushed forward, shank extended. He hit the slick patch and went down hard, his weapon skittering across the wet tiles. Cruz pounced, pinning Tanner with a knee to his chest, one hand gripping his throat. With his free hand, he grabbed the fallen shank and pressed it against Tanner's eye. "Tell Parker I'm not some punk he can intimidate," Cruz hissed. "Tell him I survived worse than him on the streets. Tell him next time. Send more men." The shower room door burst open. 2 guards rushed in, batons drawn. "Break it up! On the ground now!" Cruz released Tanner and dropped the shank, raising his hands in surrender. As the guards cuffed him, he noticed something surprising. Despite his bloody nose and injured knee, Reese was smiling, and behind the pain in Tanner's eyes was something that looked remarkably like satisfaction. Too late, Cruz realized his mistake. This hadn't been about beating him. It had been about provoking him, getting him sent to solitary where he would be completely isolated, cut off from any potential allies. As the guards led him away, Cruz caught a glimpse of Parker standing in the corridor observing. Their eyes met briefly. Parker didn't speak, didn't need to. His message was clear. Their game was just beginning. 3 days in solitary had given Cruz plenty of time to think. The 6x9 cell contained nothing but a concrete slab with a thin mattress, a stainless steel toilet sink combo, and the endless drone of the ventilation system. No books, no radio, no human contact except for the silent guard who delivered meals through a slot in the door. The isolation was meant to break inmates, strip away their defenses. For Cruz, it had the opposite effect. It clarified his thinking, sharpened his resolve. Parker had orchestrated the shower incident perfectly, but Cruz had survived worse. His father's closet had been smaller, darker, and he'd been locked in there for days at a time as a child. The cell door opened, flooding the dim space with fluorescent light from the corridor. Officer Bennett stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. Mid-40s, crew cut going gray at the temples. Perpetual sunburn on his neck from weekend fishing trips. "On your feet, inmate," Bennett ordered. Hands against the wall. Cruz complied, assuming the standard position for cuffing. Instead, Bennett stepped into the cell and closed the door partway, creating a pocket of relative privacy. "Disciplinary committee reviewed your case," Bennett said, his voice professionally neutral. "Fighting, possession of a weapon, could get you another 6 months added to your sentence." Cruz remained silent, face to the wall. Bennett was known as a straight shooter, neither cruel nor corrupt, but still a screw. Not to be trusted. "Interesting thing, though," Bennett continued. "Neither Tanner nor Reese filed a complaint. Said it was just a misunderstanding. Slip in the shower." Now Cruz turned slightly, his interest piqued. "That right?" Bennett nodded. "Parker's call, obviously. He doesn't want this going on record. Keeps things in-house. So I'm out?" Cruz asked, trying to mask his confusion. Parker had gone to the trouble of setting him up only to let him walk. Not quite, Bennett replied. 3 more days for the fighting alone. But I could expedite your release if we come to an understanding. And there it was. Cruz had been in enough institutions to recognize the setup. What kind of understanding? Bennett glanced toward the partially open door, then lowered his voice. I've been watching Parker's operation for 3 years, building a case. I need someone on the inside, someone with nothing to lose. Cruz laughed. Softly. You want me to snitch? In this place? Might as well put a bullet in my head now. I'm offering protection, Bennett insisted. And when this is over, a transfer to minimum security, maybe even time off your sentence. Promises from a guard. Cruz scoffed. Worth about as much as promises from my public defender. Bennett's expression hardened. Parker's got half the guards in his pocket. Runs more drugs through this prison than most dealers move on the street. You think that food tray incident was the end of it? He's just getting started with you. Cruz turned fully now, facing Bennett despite the procedural violation. Why me? Got plenty of snitches already, I bet. Because you've got the balls to stand up to him, Bennett replied. And because you've got nothing to lose. Isolated. No allies. Perfect position to work your way in. Cruz considered his options. Bennett was right about one thing. He had nothing to lose. But trusting a guard was risky. Especially with Parker's network of eyes and ears throughout the prison. What exactly would you want? Cruz asked, testing the waters. Information, Bennett said. Names, delivery methods, which guards are involved. Build me a case solid enough that when we move, we get everything in one sweep. No loose ends. It was tempting. A chance to not only survive, but potentially gain advantages. But Cruz had grown up in neighborhoods where cooperating with law enforcement was a death sentence. I need time to think, Cruz replied. Bennett nodded, apparently expecting this response. Think fast. You'll be out in 3 days. Parker will have plans for you, guaranteed. When you're ready to talk, ask for me during your kitchen duty. Kitchen duty? Cruz frowned. I'm not assigned to the kitchen. A thin smile crossed Bennett's face. You are now. Supervisor requested you specifically. After your release from solitary. Seems Mendez wants to keep an eye on you. As Bennett reopened the door fully and stepped out, Cruz processed this new information. Kitchen duty under Mendez. Close quarters with Parker's right hand. Either a chance to get inside the operation or a convenient opportunity for an accident to occur. 3 days, Cruz, Bennett said as he closed the cell door. Make your choice. Alone again in the dimness, Cruz sat on his concrete bed and weighed his dwindling options. Cooperate with Bennett, submit to Parker, or continue his increasingly dangerous resistance. None offered a clear path to survival, let alone victory. The game was becoming more complex, and Cruz was playing with limited information. But one thing was becoming clear. Bennett's appearance wasn't coincidental. Nothing in prison ever was. Steam billowed from massive industrial pots as Cruz scrubbed burnt food from their bottoms. 3 hours into his first kitchen shift, his hands were raw, his back ached, and his uniform was soaked with sweat and food splatter. The work was deliberate. Punishment, assigned by Mendez without a word of explanation. Across the kitchen, Mendez worked methodically, preparing the next day's breakfast with quiet efficiency. He hadn't spoken directly to Cruz since his arrival, communicating only through Lewis, who relayed increasingly unpleasant tasks. Grease trap needs cleaning, Lewis announced, dropping a wire brush beside Cruz's station. Mendez says do it before lunch prep. Cruz glanced at the drain embedded in the floor, clogged with congealed animal fat and food particles. The stench alone made his stomach turn. Tell Mendez he can clean his own damn traps. Lewis shook his head. Your funeral, man. He retreated to his own station, maintaining safe distance from what was obviously a test of wills. Cruz abandoned the pots and approached Mendez directly, ignoring the subtle shift in atmosphere as other kitchen workers tensed for confrontation. Mendez continued chopping vegetables, his knife moving with practiced precision. This what Parker sent me here for? Cruz demanded, keeping his voice low enough to avoid drawing the guard's attention. Scrubbing pots and cleaning grease traps. Until I break? Mendez finally looked up, his expression unreadable. You're here to learn respect. Respect is earned, Cruz countered. Not demanded by some kitchen rat playing power games. The knife in Mendez's hand stilled. For a brief moment, something dangerous flickered in his eyes, then vanished behind his customary blank facade. 3 years ago, I had a worker like you. Thought the kitchen was beneath him. He had an accident with the meat slicer, lost 3 fingers. Cruz held his gaze. That a threat? That's reality. Mendez replied calmly. Kitchen work is dangerous. Accidents happen to the careless and disrespectful. From the corner of his eye, Cruz noticed Lewis and the other workers had created a wider buffer zone around them. No one wanted to witness whatever might happen next. "What's Parker's game?" Cruz pressed. "Why not just have me shanked in the yard? Cleaner. Sends a message." Mendez resumed chopping. "Parker doesn't waste resources. Everyone has value if properly motivated. So I'm being recycled instead of discarded," Cruz said with a bitter laugh. "How considerate. You have skills," Mendez observed. "Street connections, physical courage, useful qualities if redirected appropriately." Now it made sense. This wasn't just punishment. It was assessment. Parker was evaluating whether Cruz could be turned from threat to asset. The realization should have been comforting, but it only heightened Cruz's wariness. Men like Parker didn't offer second chances without steep costs. "And if I play along?" Cruz asked. "What then?" "Then you survive," Mendez answered simply. "Maybe even prosper." The kitchen door swung open as Officer Bennett entered for a routine check. His eyes locked briefly with Cruz's, a subtle reminder of their conversation in solitary. Another option, another potential ally with his own agenda. "Everything in order, Mendez?" Bennett asked, scanning the kitchen with practiced casualness. "Yes, sir," Mendez replied. "Just training new staff." Bennett nodded, lingering perhaps a moment too long near Cruz before continuing his rounds. The interaction wasn't lost on Mendez, whose expression remained neutral, but whose eyes tracked Bennett with newfound interest. When the guard had gone, Mendez stepped closer to Cruz. "Advice," he said quietly. "Guards are not your friends, especially—" "Not Bennett. Speaking from experience?" Cruz countered. "Speaking from survival," Mendez replied. "Bennett has been building cases against inmates for years, using them, then discarding them when they're no longer useful, or when they become liabilities. This was new information, potentially valuable. Either a genuine warning or a calculated move to isolate Cruz further. Grease trap still needs cleaning," Mendez said, returning to his workstation. "After that, help Lewis prep the lunch vegetables. Do good work and tomorrow might be easier." Cruz returned to his station, mind racing. With calculations, Mendez had revealed more than intended, both about Parker's interest in recruiting him and about Bennett's history of using informants. Knowledge was currency in prison, and Cruz had just acquired a small fortune. The question was how to spend it. Play along with Mendez, gaining access to Parker's operation from within, cooperate with Bennett, trading information for protection and potential rewards, or forge his own path using his growing understanding of Oakridge's power dynamics to carve out an independent position. As he knelt to tackle the disgusting grease trap, Cruz made his decision. For now, he would appear to submit, learn the kitchen routines, observe Mendez's contraband operation up close, gather intelligence that would serve him regardless of which alliance he ultimately chose. Survival first, then advantage, then victory, one degrading task at a time. 2 weeks of kitchen duty had transformed Cruz's understanding of Oakridge. The prison's true economy flowed through the meals, the seemingly innocent exchange of trays that delivered more than just food. Cigarettes tucked inside napkins, notes passed beneath bread slices, tiny packages of pills concealed in meatloaf. An intricate system orchestrated by Mendez with quiet precision. Cruz had played his role perfectly, transitioning from reluctant worker to valuable asset. He had learned the routines, mastered the signals, proven his discretion. Mendez had gradually increased his responsibilities, though never revealing the full scope of the operation. Today, something was different. Mendez had been unusually tense during breakfast service, checking his watch repeatedly. When the meal ended, he approached Cruz directly. "Laundry detail after cleanup," he said quietly. "They need extra hands." Cruz understood immediately. This wasn't about laundry. The laundry room was Parker's unofficial office, the place where significant business was conducted away from cameras and guard stations. "Something wrong with my kitchen work?" Cruz asked, maintaining the pretense for any listening ears. "Just following orders," Mendez replied with a shrug. "Supervisor asked for you specifically." An hour later, Cruz entered the laundry room, the humid air thick with the smell of industrial detergent and fabric softener. 2 inmates operated the massive washing machines, their rhythmic churning providing white noise to mask conversations. They nodded to Cruz, then pointedly focused on their work. Parker sat on an overturned laundry basket in the back corner, partially hidden by hanging sheets drying on lines strung across the room. He wore standard prison blues, nothing to distinguish him from any other inmate, yet his presence filled the space with palpable authority. Cruz. Parker greeted him, gesturing to another basket. Have a seat. Cruz remained standing. A small act of defiance, carefully calculated, not enough to provoke, but enough to maintain dignity. Mendez said you wanted to see me. Parker smiled slightly. Proud, stubborn, consistent at least. He studied Cruz with clinical detachment. 2 weeks in the kitchen. Mendez says you learn quickly. Asks the right questions. Keep your mouth shut about things that don't concern you. Just trying to survive. Cruz replied neutrally. Survival? Parker nodded. Basic instinct. But some men aim higher. Power, respect, profit. What are you aiming for, Cruz? The question was a test. Cruz considered his answer carefully. All three. But respect comes first. Parker seemed pleased with this response. Good answer. Wrong order, though. Power first, then profit, then respect follows naturally. He leaned forward. You made a bad start here. Disrespecting Mendez, approaching Donovan, fighting my men in the shower. Your men jumped me, Cruz pointed out. They tested you, Parker corrected him, and you passed. Showed courage, skill, resourcefulness, useful qualities. Cruz processed this revelation. The shower ambush hadn't been punishment, but evaluation. Parker had been assessing him from the beginning. So what now? Cruz asked. You forgive the disrespect and we become best friends? Parker laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily transformed his hard features. I like you, Cruz. Direct. No. Bullshit. But friendship isn't on the table. Partnership, maybe. On my terms. What terms? You work for me, Parker stated flatly. Start small. Prove yourself. Move product through the kitchen with Mendez. Be my eyes and ears in places I can't reach. Do well, and your responsibilities grow. Along with your privileges. Cruz maintained a neutral expression, though his mind raced with implications. And the alternative? Parker's smile vanished. There isn't one. You're marked. Everyone knows it. Without my protection, you won't last a month. Someone will stick you for status, or simply because they think it pleases me. So join or die, Cruz summarized. Not much of a choice, more than most get. Parker replied. I'm offering opportunity. Cruz, something rare in here. Chance to be somebody instead of just another number waiting out his sentence. Cruz weighed his options. Bennett's offer of protection in exchange for information. Parker's offer of status in exchange for loyalty. Both carried severe risks. Both offered potential advantages. I need to think about it, Cruz said finally. Parker stood signaling the end of their meeting. 24 hours. Think carefully. This offer expires tomorrow. As Cruz turned to leave, Parker added, one more thing. Officer Bennett, he approached you in solitary, didn't he? Offered protection for information? Cruz froze, then slowly turned back. How did you know that? Parker's expression was almost pitying. Bennett approaches everyone who crosses me. Standard. Procedure. He's been trying to build a case against me for years. Never succeeds because I know everything that happens in Oakridge before he does. The implication was clear. Parker's network extended even to solitary confinement. His influence reached further than Cruz had imagined. Remember that when you make your decision, Parker said softly. There are no secrets here. Only information I haven't acquired yet. Cruz left the laundry room with his mind churning. Parker had made his position crystal clear. There would be no neutral ground, no independent path. Choose Parker or choose Bennett. Survival or destruction. The clock was ticking, and Cruz had less than a day to decide which devil to trust. Cruz sat alone in the far corner of the yard, his back against the chain-link fence, watching the prison's daily routine unfold around him. 23 hours had passed since his meeting with Parker. The deadline for his decision loomed like a storm on the horizon. Officer Bennett approached with practiced casualness, completing his circuit of the yard as if Cruz's position was just another checkpoint on his route. He paused, eyes scanning the surrounding area for potential listeners. Well? Bennett asked quietly. You've had time to consider my offer. Cruz studied the guard's face, searching for signs of deception. Bennett appeared confident, assured of his position and power, but so had Parker. Two predators circling the same prey, each promising protection while concealing their true intentions. What guarantees do I get? Cruz asked. If I help you take down Parker, what happens to me afterward? Bennett smiled thinly. Written recommendation for transfer to minimum security. Potential reduction in sentence for cooperation. Protection until the case is complete. And if someone shanks me before your case is built, That won't happen, Bennett assured him. I can move you to administrative segregation, safe housing, away from general population, isolation, protective custody. The prison equivalent of witness protection and just as stigmatized. Once labeled a snitch, there was no coming back. Even in a different facility, word would follow. I need something concrete, Cruz pressed. Not promises. Actual protection. Starting now. Bennett glanced toward the guard tower, then lowered his voice further. I can arrange for a cell transfer, move you away from Wilson, put you with someone neutral, and guarantee you stays in the kitchen, close to Mendez and the operation. Cruz nodded slowly, as if considering the offer. In truth, his decision had been made hours ago, after a sleepless night weighing his limited options. Parker's reach within. Oakridge was too extensive, his intelligence network too thorough. Even if Bennett could offer temporary protection, long-term survival meant not crossing the yard boss. I'm in, Cruz said finally, but I need time to get closer to the operation, gain Mendez's trust. Relief washed across Bennett's features, quickly masked by professional detachment. Smart choice. Start with the kitchen. Document what goes out, where it goes, names, times, methods. Build me a clear picture. There's something happening today, Cruz offered, the bait in his trap. Major shipment coming in with the food delivery. Mendez has been tense all morning, checking the loading dock every 30 minutes. Bennett's eyes narrowed with interest. What kind of shipment? Don't know details yet, Cruz admitted. But Mendez cleared the storage room, sent regular workers to other duties. Whatever it is, it's big. Good, Bennett nodded. This is exactly what I need. Stay close to Mendez, watch the delivery, report everything you see. As Bennett moved away, continuing his patrol, Cruz exhaled slowly. The first piece was in place. The betrayal had begun, though not in the direction Bennett assumed. 4 hours later, Cruz stood in the kitchen storage room, helping Mendez inventory the recent delivery. Standard procedure, nothing unusual or suspicious. The shipment, Bennett, was so interested in contained nothing but the usual food supplies. Potatoes are 10 pounds short, Mendez noted, marking his clipboard. Again, Cruz nodded, only half listening. His attention was on the clock above the door. Bennett would be making his move soon, acting on the false information Cruz had provided. The raid would find nothing except legitimate kitchen supplies, making Bennett look foolish and overzealous to his superiors. More importantly, it would cement Cruz's position with Parker, proving his loyalty not through mere words, but through decisive action against their common enemy. The kitchen doors burst open as Bennett entered, flanked by 3 additional guards. Surprise inspection, he announced, his eyes locking briefly with Cruz's. Everyone against the wall. Mendez complied without protest, his expression betraying nothing as the guards began searching the storage room, opening containers, checking behind shelves, inspecting the newly arrived supplies. Nothing here, sir, reported one of the guards. After 15 minutes of thorough searching, Bennett's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He approached Mendez, standing uncomfortably close. Where is it, Mendez? What came in today? Just food, sir, Mendez replied calmly. Weekly delivery. Everything on the manifest. Bennett turned to Cruz, suspicion dawning in his eyes. You said there was a special shipment, something big. Cruz shrugged, the picture of innocence. Must have misunderstood, sir. Mendez was checking the dock because we were short on deliveries last week. Wanted to make sure everything arrived this time. The look Bennett gave him contained pure venom. Understanding bloomed in his eyes. The realization that he had been played, used to deliver a message to Parker about Cruz's true loyalties. We're done here, Bennett snapped, signaling the other guards. At the door, he paused, glaring at Cruz. This isn't over. When the guards had gone, Mendez turned to Cruz with new appreciation in his eyes. Interesting strategy, he observed quietly. Dangerous. Had to make a choice, Cruz replied. Figured actions speak louder than words. Mendez nodded. Parker will be pleased, but Bennett is now a serious enemy. He doesn't forget betrayal. Neither do I, Cruz said, thinking of Bennett's manipulation in solitary, the false promises, the casual way he used desperate inmates for his own advancement. Later that evening, as inmates returned to their cells for count, Parker passed Cruz. In the corridor, no words were exchanged, just a slight nod of acknowledgement. But the message was clear. Cruz had chosen his side. The war was just beginning. In his cell, Cruz found a small package hidden beneath his pillow. Cigarettes, a luxury watch, and a note with 2 words. Good start. He had gambled everything on this play, burned his bridge with Bennett completely, committed fully to Parker's organization. The only question remaining was whether he had chosen the right devil in this prison of hard choices. The yard erupted in violence with shocking suddenness. One moment, inmates were exercising, playing basketball, conducting quiet business in the usual corners. The next, two rival factions clashed near the weight pile, fists and makeshift weapons, appearing as if from thin air. Cruz watched from his position near the kitchen entrance, where he had been speaking with Mendez about the day's deliveries. In the 3 weeks since his betrayal of Bennett, Cruz had risen quickly through Parker's ranks, becoming Mendez's primary assistant in the contraband operation. "Something's wrong," Mendez muttered, his eyes tracking the fight as guards rushed to contain it. "This isn't scheduled." Cruz raised an eyebrow. "Scheduled? Parker approves all yard conflicts," Mendez explained quietly. "Controls when and where tension gets released. Keeps things manageable." The implication was clear. This outbreak wasn't part of Parker's carefully orchestrated system. Someone else had initiated violence without authorization, a direct challenge to his authority. Across the yard, Donovan and his white supremacist crew stood watching the chaos, neither participating nor retreating. Their neutrality in itself was a statement, a refusal to help maintain Parker's order. Guards swarmed the fighting inmates, batons swinging, pepper spray deployed in choking clouds. The prison siren wailed, signaling immediate lockdown. All inmates were to return to their cells for emergency count. "Where's Parker?" Cruz asked, scanning the yard for the familiar figure. Mendez shook his head. "Not here. Meeting with the warden about kitchen budget." The timing couldn't be coincidence. Someone had deliberately chosen to act while Parker was absent from the yard, unable to direct his people or assert control. As they filed toward the cell blocks with the other inmates, Cruz noticed Officer Bennett supervising the movement, his expression grim but his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Their gazes met briefly, Bennett's conveying a clear message. "This is just the beginning." Inside, lockdown protocols confined every inmate to their cell. Meals were delivered on trays, recreation canceled, showers permitted only under heavy guard. Perfect conditions for rumors to spread unchecked through the whispered conversations between neighboring cells. "Heard Donovan's making a move," Wilson told Cruz as they sat in their shared cell on the second day of lockdown, saying Parker's gotten soft, taking too much profit for himself. Cruz considered this information carefully. Donovan doesn't have the reach. Not enough soldiers. Doesn't need them if he's got guards on his side, Wilson replied. Word is Bennett's backing his play, letting Donovan's crew move product through the visiting room instead of the kitchen, cutting Mendez out completely. If true, this represented a fundamental shift in Oakridge's power structure. Parker's control had always been based on exclusive access to contraband routes through the kitchen. If Donovan had established an alternative supply line through visiting, the monopoly was broken. There's more, Wilson continued, lowering his voice further. 3 of Parker's guys got sent to the hole yesterday. Random cell searches found weapons, drugs. Too convenient. Cruz nodded, the picture becoming clearer. Bennett was using his authority to systematically weaken Parker's organization, targeting key lieutenants for removal, disrupting the established order to create opportunity for Donovan's faction. Revenge for Cruz's betrayal, certainly, but also a calculated power play. If Bennett couldn't build a case against Parker through informants, he would destroy him by promoting a rival he could better control. On the 3rd day of lockdown, a folded note appeared beneath Cruz's dinner tray. The message was brief. Storage room, midnight, critical situation. Cruz showed it to Wilson, who shook his head in warning. Risky. Guards are watching everything during lockdown. No choice, Cruz replied. If Parker's operation collapses, we all suffer. When the cell block settled into nighttime quiet, Cruz prepared for one of the most dangerous moves in prison, movement during lockdown. The guards made hourly rounds, which created narrow windows for unauthorized travel if cell doors had been tampered with. Mendez had shown him the trick weeks ago, a simple piece of cardboard inserted during the day that prevented the electronic lock from fully engaging, a necessary knowledge for anyone involved in the contraband business. As midnight approached, Cruz slipped out of his cell and moved silently through the darkened tier, every sense alert for guard movement or watchful inmates. The kitchen storage room was 2 floors down, requiring navigation of rarely used maintenance stairs to avoid regular patrol routes. The prison was never truly silent, even during lockdown. Distant coughs, muffled conversations, the occasional Cry from troubled sleep created a constant background murmur. Cruz used these ambient sounds as cover for his own movement, freezing in place whenever a new noise indicated potential danger. Whatever awaited him in the storage room, Cruz knew one thing with certainty. The delicate balance of power in Oakridge was shifting, and his survival depended on positioning himself correctly before the new order solidified. The storage room was dimly lit by a single emergency bulb, casting long shadows across shelves stacked with dry goods and canned supplies. Parker sat on a crate of flour, his customary calm replaced by tightly controlled tension. Beside him stood Tanner, sporting a fresh bruise across his cheekbone, evidence of recent violence. Mendez emerged from behind a row of shelves as Cruz entered, securing the door behind him. The three men nodded acknowledgement to Cruz, completing their improvised war council. Situation's deteriorating, Parker began without preamble. Bennett's made his move, coordinating with Donovan. 3 of my key people in solitary, 2 more transferred to different blocks. Supply routes compromised. Cruz absorbed this confirmation of the rumors. How bad? Bad enough, Mendez replied. Bennett's conducting daily searches of the kitchen now. Contraband flow cut by 70%. Cigarettes already trading at triple price. Parker's expression remained controlled, but Cruz could see the calculation behind his eyes. This isn't just about business, Parker said. It's about control. Bennett's trying to destabilize the entire system, create chaos he can manipulate. Why now? Cruz asked. What changed? Parker's gaze shifted to Cruz. You did. Bennett took your betrayal personally. Decided if he couldn't build a case against me legally, he'd destroy me operationally. Used Donovan as his weapon. The implications hung heavy in the small room. Cruz had accelerated this conflict through his actions, however unintentionally. Donovan's crew jumped 2 of our distributors in the yard yesterday, Tanner reported. Message sent, anyone working with us gets hurt. Meanwhile, Donovan's people are somehow getting extra commissary, better jobs, special privileges. Bennett, Mendez confirmed, using his position to reward Donovan's faction. Parker nodded, then surprised everyone by smiling slightly, which is exactly what I expected. Cruz frowned. You wanted this war? I anticipated it, Parker corrected. Bennett's been building toward this move for years. Donovan's always wanted more territory, predictable players making predictable moves. So you have a counter-strategy, Mendez stated rather than asked. Parker's smile widened. Always. Bennett thinks he's clever, using official channels to disrupt our operation. But he's overlooking something fundamental about prison economy. Demand remains constant, Cruz realized aloud. Cut one supply line, another emerges. Precisely, Parker nodded approvingly. While Bennett focuses on the kitchen and visiting room, he's neglected other potential routes. Laundry, maintenance, guard shift changes. Tanner grinned. We've been developing alternatives for months, contingencies. The pieces clicked into place for Cruz. Parker hadn't been caught unprepared. He had been setting up parallel systems, preparing for exactly this scenario. The mark of a true strategist, thinking several moves ahead. Where do I fit in? Cruz asked directly. You're the perfect distraction, Parker replied. Bennett's fixated on you, the one who got away. His personal vendetta clouds his judgment, keeps his attention where we want it. Cruz processed this information with mixed emotions. Being used as bait carried obvious risks, but also indicated his value to Parker's organization. And Mendez? He asked, glancing at the quiet kitchen manager. Mendez is about to have an unfortunate incident, Parker said calmly, one that requires medical attention and temporary removal from kitchen duty. Mendez nodded, accepting this direction, without question. Bennett will see it as another victory, while our real operation shifts elsewhere, Parker confirmed. Let Bennett and Donovan think they're winning. Let them grow confident, careless. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Allow the apparent collapse of the known power structure, while establishing a new one beneath the surface. By the time Bennett realized what was happening, the transition would be complete. There will be violence, Parker acknowledged. Sacrifices. Some of our people will get hurt as we withdraw from traditional territories. The yard will seem chaotic for a time. That's necessary cover for our reorganization. Cruz understood the unspoken element of this plan. Some of Parker's crew would be sacrificed, left exposed during the transition. The weak would be culled, the strong preserved for the new structure. Cold, calculating, effective. Your role is simple, Parker told. Cruz, continue working in the kitchen. Report everything to Bennett. Feed him just enough truth to keep him confident, mixed with misinformation to keep him looking the wrong direction. Double agent, Cruz summarized. Triple, technically. Parker smiled. Bennett thinks you're his reluctant informant. Donovan will think you're abandoning a sinking ship when you approach him next week. I'll know you're actually working for me. The complexity of the deception was impressive. Layers of manipulation designed to keep enemies confused while Parker restructured his operation beneath their notice. Meeting over, Parker announced, checking his watch. 40 minutes until the next guard sweep. Questions? Cruz had many, but only one mattered immediately. How do I know you won't sacrifice me like the others? Parker's expression turned serious. You don't. That's the nature of our business. But useful tools are rarely discarded by wise men. It wasn't the reassurance Cruz hoped for, but it was honest. In Parker's world, value determined survival. Cruz would need to remain valuable to ensure his own protection. As they prepared to return to their cells through separate routes, Cruz realized he had glimpsed something few ever saw. Parker's true strategic thinking. The man wasn't just a prison kingpin. He was a grandmaster playing a game most couldn't even comprehend. A week passed before the lockdown lifted. The prison administration satisfied that order had been sufficiently restored. In that time, the power dynamics of Oakridge had visibly shifted. Donovan's crew strutted through the cell blocks with new confidence. Parker's known associates kept their heads down, many sporting fresh bruises or walking with pained limbs, evidence of discussions that had occurred in blind spots away from cameras. To all appearances, a new regime was ascending. The contraband economy had been disrupted, prices had skyrocketed, and the usual reliable sources had dried up. Anxiety permeated the yard as inmates adjusted to the uncertain new reality. Cruz played his role perfectly, maintaining his kitchen position while visibly distancing himself from Parker's diminished organization. He had 2 careful conversations with members of Donovan's crew, expressing veiled interest in switching allegiance, setting the groundwork for his supposed defection. Bennett watched it all with poorly concealed satisfaction, making daily appearances in the kitchen to oversee operations, asking pointed questions about remaining contraband routes. Cruz fed him carefully crafted information, a mixture of outdated truths and plausible falsehoods designed to maintain his credibility while misleading about Parker's actual plans. On the surface, Parker himself seemed subdued, accepting his reduced status with suspicious calm. He no longer held court in the yard, no longer received public deference from passing inmates. The appearance of defeat was convincing to most observers. Then Mendez returned from the infirmary. His entrance to the yard created a ripple of whispers that spread outward like concentric circles in still water. He walked with a slight limp, his left arm bandaged from a supposed accident with kitchen equipment. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, flat and cold as winter ice, scanning the yard with methodical purpose. Cruz watched from his position near the basketball court as Mendez crossed directly toward Donovan's group without hesitation. Conversations stilled, guards tensed, hands moving to batons. Everyone expected confrontation, violence, the inevitable clash between old power and new. Instead, Mendez stopped a respectful distance from Donovan, said something too quiet for others to hear, then simply turned and walked toward the kitchen. No aggression, no challenge. A brief exchange that left Donovan frowning in apparent confusion. What was that about? Asked Wilson, who had joined Cruz in watching the yard dynamics. Cruz shrugged, though he suspected he knew. The game was shifting to its next phase. In the kitchen that afternoon, Mendez resumed his position as if he had never left. The supervisor assigned Cruz to work alongside him, preparing dinner vegetables. Heard you had an accident, Cruz commented. When they were relatively private, Mendez nodded slightly. Industrial mixer, careless moment. Both men knew it was fiction, a manufactured incident to remove Mendez temporarily from Bennett's scrutiny. The real question was what had transpired during his absence. Things changed while you were gone, Cruz offered. So I see, Mendez replied, his knife moving with practiced efficiency through onions. Bennett seems pleased with himself. Cruz glanced toward the guard station where Bennett was conversing with another officer. Won't last? A ghost of a smile touched Mendez's lips. No, it won't. They worked in silence for several minutes before Mendez spoke again, his voice barely audible above the kitchen noise. Laundry room. After dinner service. Parker has new assignments. Cruz nodded almost imperceptibly. The counter move was beginning. That Evening, as inmates filed into the chow hall for dinner, a subtle but significant pattern emerged. Known members of Donovan's crew received trays from specific servers, their meals seemingly identical to others, but distinguished by barely noticeable marks on the trays themselves. Small scratches that would go unnoticed by guards but carried meaning to those who knew the system. Cruz, now understanding more of Parker's strategy, recognized what was happening. After a week of deprivation, Donovan's people were being allowed access to contraband again, but through new channels, controlled channels, the beginning of absorption rather than elimination. By the time Cruz reached the laundry room that night, slipping through the prison's blind spots with practiced ease, the next phase was already in motion. Parker sat in his usual spot, but he wasn't alone. 3 of Donovan's lieutenants stood nearby, engaged in quiet negotiation. Parker nodded acknowledgement as Cruz entered, but continued his conversation. The terms being discussed were clear: a new division of territory and responsibility that would integrate elements of Donovan's operation into Parker's restructured system. Not war, but acquisition. Not resistance, but adaptation. Parker wasn't fighting the change Bennett had initiated. He was shaping it to his advantage, turning apparent defeat into reorganization. When the Donovan's men left, Parker turned his attention to Cruz. "Bennett still trusts you?" he asked directly. Cruz nodded. "Thinks I'm his inside source. Reporting on your collapse." "Good." Parker smiled thinly. "Tomorrow that changes. Tomorrow we show Officer Bennett exactly who really controls Oakridge." The calm confidence in Parker's voice sent a chill through Cruz. Whatever was coming would be calculated, comprehensive, and utterly without mercy. Bennett had initiated a game without understanding all the players or rules, and now the true master of the board was making his move. The storage room door closed behind Cruz with an ominous click. He found himself facing not just Parker as expected, but a gathering that represented the new reality of Oakridge. Mendez stood to Parker's right, Donovan to his left. Tanner guarded the door while 2 of Donovan's lieutenants flanked their leader. Former rivals now united in calculated alliance. "Our friend Bennett conducts his inspection in 30 minutes. Parker began without preamble. "Today he finds exactly what he's been looking for." Cruz tensed. "You're setting him up." "He set himself up," Donovan interjected, his voice hard. "Promised me control, protection. Delivered neither." The alliance became clearer to Cruz. Bennett had overplayed his hand, failing to provide the support Donovan needed to truly seize power. Now abandoned by his sponsor, Donovan had accepted Parker's offer of partnership rather than face inevitable defeat. "Bennett's been stockpiling confiscated contraband," Parker explained, "building evidence against me while skimming products for himself. Classic corruption, but he's been careful, covering his tracks, until today," Mendez added quietly. Parker nodded. An anonymous tip to the warden. A search of Bennett's locker and vehicle. Substantial quantities of cigarettes, pills, even a cell phone. All with inmate fingerprints conveniently removed. And replaced with his, Donovan concluded with grim satisfaction. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Use Bennett's own methods against him, turning his evidence collection into proof of his corruption. Even if he denied the charges, the investigation alone would remove him from the equation temporarily, possibly permanently. "Where do I fit in?" Cruz asked, already suspecting the answer. Parker's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a calculating gleam. "You're the witness, the one who'll testify that Bennett approached you, offered deals, coerced cooperation. My word against a guard's," Cruz pointed out. "Not exactly reliable." "Not alone," Parker agreed, "but combined with physical evidence and collaborative testimony from multiple sources, including a guard who's been documenting Bennett's irregular activities for months, it becomes compelling." Cruz processed this information. Parker's network extended even into the guard ranks, officers who were either on his payroll or had their own reasons to undermine Bennett. The depth of his influence continued to surprise Cruz. "And afterward?" Cruz pressed. "Bennett has friends among the guards. They'll make my life hell. Which is why you'll be transferred to kitchen management immediately afterward," Mendez stated. "Under my direct supervision, protected." The pieces aligned in Cruz's mind. This wasn't just about eliminating Bennett, it was about fully integrating Cruz into the operation, binding him to Parker's organization through shared complicity. Once he testified against a guard, there would be no going back, no neutrality possible. "Decision time, Cruz," Parker said quietly. You're either with us, completely, or you're not. No middle ground. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Cruz. The moment of commitment had arrived, the point where temporary alliances became permanent bonds. Whatever choice he made now would define his remaining years at Oakridge. What happens to Bennett? Cruz asked, buying time to consider his options. Best case for him, administrative leave during investigation, then transfer to another facility with a permanent mark on his record. Parker replied. Worst case, criminal charges for smuggling, corruption, prisoner endangerment. Cruz nodded slowly. Bennett deserved whatever came to him. The guard had manipulated countless inmates, using them as pawns in his personal vendetta against Parker, discarding them when they were no longer useful. There was a certain justice in his downfall. I'm in, Cruz decided, but I want guarantees. Protection, privileges, profit share. Parker smiled slightly, apparently pleased by Cruz's direct approach. Reasonable. 20% of kitchen proceeds. Cell transfer to B block where Mendez can watch your back. Commissary privileges at lieutenant level. Better terms than Cruz had expected. Either Parker valued his cooperation highly, or planned to eliminate him once Bennett was dealt with. The risk was substantial either way. One more thing, Cruz added. Wilson gets protection too. He's kept his mouth shut, stayed, loyal. A small test of Parker's intentions. If he agreed too easily, it suggested duplicity. If he refused outright, it revealed inflexibility that might become dangerous later. Parker considered briefly, then nodded. Acceptable. Wilson gets transferred with you. No profit share for him, but basic protection and privileged commissary. The terms set, hands were shaken. A contract sealed without documentation, but binding nonetheless in the prison economy of favors and consequences. As the meeting concluded, Mendez drew Cruz aside. You understand what this means? After today, there's no walking away. You're part of the structure. Cruz understood perfectly. He had just committed to Parker's organization completely, tied his fate to the complex network of power and control that governed Oakridge from the shadows. For better or worse, he had chosen his side in the silent war that never truly ended within prison walls. I know what I'm doing, Cruz assured him, though uncertainty lingered beneath his confident exterior. Mendez studied him with knowing eyes. We all think that at the beginning. 3 hours later, the prison buzzed with the news. Officer Bennett had been escorted from the facility in handcuffs, his locker yielding a treasure trove of contraband. Multiple inmates had provided statements about his corrupt practices. Chief among them, Miguel Cruz, who detailed Bennett's attempts to recruit informants through coercion and false promises. By dinner, Cruz had been transferred to B block, assigned a new cell with Wilson, and officially promoted to kitchen management under Mendez's supervision. The speed of the transition left no doubt about Parker's influence with prison administration. The message traveled through Oakridge like electricity through a wire. Parker remained in control. Challenges would be absorbed or eliminated. The system adapted but never truly changed. Cruz had secured his position, gained protection and privileges. But as he lay in his new cell that night, he wondered about the price of that security, not just in terms of loyalty pledged or risks taken, but in the gradual transformation of his own nature. How long before he became just another Parker, seeing people as tools, relationships as transactions? The thought troubled him more than he expected. But in Oakridge, such concerns were luxuries few could afford. Survival first. Philosophical. Reflection later. Perhaps in another life, another place. If such a place still existed for men like him. 6 months after Bennett's removal, Oakridge had settled into a new equilibrium. The chaos that followed the guard's arrest had been contained, controlled, and ultimately shaped into a more efficient system under Parker's expanded operation. What appeared to outsiders as a natural rebalancing of prison dynamics was in reality a carefully orchestrated transition to a more sophisticated power structure. Cruz stood at the serving line, overseeing breakfast distribution with the quiet authority he had developed during his promotion to Mendez's second-in-command. Under his watchful eye, kitchen workers moved with practiced efficiency, serving standard portions to general population while discreetly marking specific trays for privileged inmates. The contraband operation had evolved beyond simple handoffs in food. Now it incorporated a complex system of coded meal selections, tray markings, and strategic placements that communicated everything from delivery schedules to payment confirmations. Every element designed to be invisible to the untrained. Mendez approached, clipboard in hand, the picture of a dedicated kitchen manager performing routine checks. "Delivery confirmed for tomorrow," he said quietly. "Double shipment." Cruz nodded. "Distribution routes set. B and D blocks covered. Donovan's handling A block personally." The merger of operations had proven surprisingly effective. Donovan's crew controlled territories that Parker's people had never fully penetrated, while Parker's infrastructure provided security and consistency that Donovan had lacked. Together, they had created an organization more resilient than either could have maintained alone. "Parker wants to see you," Mendez added. "Laundry room after breakfast." Cruz raised an eyebrow. Direct meetings with Parker had become rare as the operation expanded. The yard boss now operated primarily through lieutenants, maintaining distance that provided both security and deniability. "Problem?" Cruz asked. Mendez shook his head. "Opportunity." After breakfast service concluded, Cruz made his way to the laundry room through now familiar routes. The prison landscape had become second nature to him, its rhythms and blind spots mapped in his mind with precise detail. He moved through Oakridge like a native, no longer the outsider who had arrived with something to prove. Parker waited in his usual spot, reviewing handwritten ledgers that documented the operation's transactions. At 52, with salt and pepper, hair and deepening lines around his eyes, he resembled a middle management accountant more than a prison kingpin. The resemblance was deceptive and deliberately cultivated. "Cruz," Parker greeted him without looking up. "Right on time." Cruz took a seat on a nearby laundry basket, waiting. Parker had taught him the value of patience, of letting silence do the work of intimidation or anticipation. Finally, Parker set aside his ledgers. 3 months until my parole hearing," he said simply. Cruz nodded. The date was known to Parker's inner circle, a looming transition that had been part of long-term planning for over a year. "Assuming all goes well, I'll be leaving Oakridge." Parker continued. "The operation needs clear succession to avoid instability." This was the opportunity Mendez had referenced. Leadership change in prison organizations typically created dangerous power vacuums, opportunities for ambitious challengers to make claims through violence or manipulation. A controlled transition was rare and valuable. Mendez would be the obvious odd choice, Cruz observed neutrally. Parker studied him with calculating eyes. "Mendez has 18 months left on his sentence. Too short for effective leadership establishment, too long for temporary management." Cruz maintained a neutral expression, though his pulse quickened. The implication was clear. "You have 4 years remaining," Parker continued. "Enough time to solidify control, establish systems, train your eventual replacement. Your background gives you credibility with different factions. Your handling of the Bennett situation proved your strategic thinking. Donovan might have other ideas," Cruz pointed out. Parker smiled slightly. "Donovan understands his limitations. He's effective in his sphere, but lacks the vision for overall management. The arrangement we've discussed gives him expanded territory and profit share in exchange for supporting your transition to primary leadership." Everything had been arranged, negotiations conducted, agreements reached. Parker's meticulous planning extended even to his own departure, ensuring the system he had built would continue without him. "Why me?" Cruz asked directly. 6 months ago, I was still an outsider, a potential threat. Parker leaned forward. "Because you understand what most never grasp. Prison isn't about punishment or rehabilitation. It's about control. Systems within systems. You recognize the patterns quickly, adapted instead of fighting blindly. That's rare." The assessment was accurate but incomplete. Cruz suspected his initial challenge to Parker's authority had actually marked him as a potential successor, someone with the courage and intelligence to test boundaries while being pragmatic enough to recognize beneficial alliances. "There would be conditions," Parker continued, "maintaining established supply routes, honoring existing agreements with guards and administrators, preserving the balance between profit and order." "And your cut," Cruz added knowingly. Parker nodded, unapologetic. 15% of gross, delivered monthly through external channels. Insurance for my continued silence and occasional consultation. The terms were reasonable. The arrangement, practical. Parker would maintain connection to the organization while establishing his external life, gradually transitioning to legitimate business using capital accumulated during his incarceration. A well-traveled path for successful prison entrepreneurs. "If I accept," Cruz said carefully, "I'd have some conditions of my own. Updates to distribution methods, different approach to discipline. more investment in protection rather than punishment. Evolution is necessary, Parker acknowledged. The system must adapt to survive, but core principles remain non-negotiable. They spent the next hour discussing specifics, the detailed mechanics of power transfer that would occur gradually over the coming months. Each step calculated, each potential complication anticipated and addressed. By the time they concluded, Cruz had verbally committed to becoming Parker's successor, accepting both the privileges and burdens that accompanied the position. As Cruz prepared to leave, Parker offered one final observation. You know why you succeeded where others failed. You understood the most important rule of prison from the beginning. Which is? Cruz asked. Respect isn't given or taken, Parker replied. It's earned through consistency. Guards, inmates, administrators, they all respond to the same fundamental principle. Predictable consequences, reliably delivered. That's the foundation of everything. Cruz nodded, recognizing the truth in Parker's words. His journey through Oakridge had been defined by this principle. From his initial challenge to Mendez to his current position of authority, the system rewarded those who understood its underlying patterns. As he returned to the kitchen to complete his shift, Cruz reflected on the irony of his situation. He had arrived at Oakridge determined to establish himself as a force to be reckoned with, unwilling to submit to existing power structures. Now he was preparing to assume leadership of the very system he had initially resisted. The plastic tray that had hit the floor 6 months ago, sparking this entire chain of events, had been replaced by thousands of precisely delivered meals containing more than mere sustenance. The disrespect that might have cost Cruz his life had instead revealed a path to unprecedented influence. In prison, as Parker had taught him, there were no coincidences, only opportunities recognized or missed, challenges navigated or failed. Cruz had navigated his successfully, transforming from outsider to heir apparent through a combination of defiance, adaptation, and calculated loyalty. As he supervised the lunch preparation, directing kitchen workers with quiet authority, Cruz caught Mendez watching him with knowing eyes. They both understood what was happening, the subtle shift already underway as power gradually transferred from one generation to the next. The prison remained the same, its walls and rules unchanged, but within those constraints, the invisible networks of control continued to evolve, adapt, and endure, and Cruz, once their potential victim, now stood poised to become their master.